Okay, so it is 1:05, so we will get started. And welcome everybody. And it is really a pivotal time here in the Bay Area and more broadly in the U.S. as public transportation is gradually recovering from the impacts of the pandemic. And especially here in the Bay Area, that was pretty severely impacted. There are some major initiatives that have been going on in our region seeking to recover ridership by making the public transportation system more convenient, more rider friendly, more accessible, more affordable. The region did a transformation action plan in 2021 and is doing a set of initiatives to integrate fares, coordinate schedules, create institutions that can run and be in charge of a coordinated transportation network, and not at all least work together as a region to bring in and also at the state level in California to make sure that we have the funding that is needed to run a convenient, affordable, accessible public transportation network. And so in the interest of doing this better, in the interest of meeting the challenge of the moment of regrowing the ridership, improving the system, which is needed not only in coming back from a disaster, but to reach the goals of our region and state, and more broadly for the environment, for greenhouse gas and pollution reduction, for equitable mobility for all, for housing. There's so many important goals that depend on a well-functioning transit system that the people who are on this panel today went together and traveled to Switzerland, which is a country that is well known and famous for having a very well coordinated, high ridership, world-class public transportation system, seeking to learn lessons that we can bring back here to the Bay Area and that may be relevant for public transportation elsewhere as well. So I want to introduce the panelists, and we will then learn about their trip, what they saw on the trip, what they experienced, what they learned, and how it might be relevant for public transportation in the Bay Area, and for those of you in the audience, how it may be relevant to you wherever you are. In terms of questions, please do use the Zoom feature to share your questions, and we're going to take questions at the end. So the panelists are Seamus Murphy, who's Executive Director of the Water Emergency Transportation Authority, if I'm getting the name correct. It's the ferry agency with a long, complicated acronym. Teresa Rommel, the Director of Funding Policy and Programs, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. Hannah Lindelof, the Strategic Policy Planning Group Manager at BART. Ian Griffiths, Policy Director at Seamless Bay Area. And Laura Tolkoff, Transportation Policy Director and Interim Chief Policy Officer at SPUR. So Ian is going to kick this off talking about the background of the trip, and then we'll have a discussion with the panelists showing, talking about what it is that they experienced and learned. Over to you, Ian.
Thank you. Adina, can you hear me? I'm not muted, right? So hi, everyone. I'm Ian Griffiths, Policy Director with Seamless Bay Area, and I'll just provide a little bit of background on why we went to Switzerland. So Switzerland, as Adina mentioned, is well known as for its extremely effective high ridership transit system. And it's also got some interesting, things about it that make it an interesting place to study for the Bay Area. It's got a lot of local governments. It's got a lot of jurisdictions. It's a multilingual region. It's similar in population to the Bay Area, a little bit bigger. It's about double the area of the Bay Area, but you can see their transit ridership in terms of mode share is about was about 4 times what our ridership was pre-pandemic. And people are traveling long distances, and they're using transit for all types of purposes: local trips, regional trips, trips, you know, across suburban, rural, and urban areas. You know, so the average distance for any trip is exactly the same, interestingly, between Switzerland and the Bay Area. People are using transit at much higher rates, and there's a variety of reasons for that. The way they manage transit there is you know, and some of the systems for coordination seem very relevant to a region like ours, which has lots of different agencies, lots of different levels of government, lots of different local funding sources, and a tradition of ballot initiatives. All of those conditions also exist in Switzerland. And one of the impacts of this, and this is, I apologize, this is in German, Switzerland, even within Europe, is, you know, one of the highest ridership systems. So this is rail kilometers per person in 2019, and Switzerland is by far and above, you know, the highest, heaviest using country in all of Europe by a significant margin in terms of number of miles people travel on rail, you know, ahead of, I think, Austria and Sweden are the next 2 countries there. So but how did this trip originate? Well, the reason that this opportunity came up actually dates back to a virtual conference that Seamless Bay Area organized back in 2022 during the pandemic. We were able to get access to a number of Swiss experts through a former colleague of mine that I used to work with. We thought this would be an interesting thing to do while everyone is on Zoom and, you know, can't go to in-person conferences. Why not organize a learning opportunity to take advantage of everyone being on Zoom? And we organized a series of sessions with some public partners, including Caltrans, SCAG, LA Metro, who supported this educational initiative. We invited a lot of Bay Area transit leaders, as well as people from across the state. We had about 80 participants and learned in a series of sessions from different levels of government in Switzerland, from operators from the federal government, about some of the basics around how the Swiss system works. There's a lot of very positive feedback from both the Swiss and the participants from California on this was extremely helpful. This is very relevant, you know, desire to really go deeper. And so the Swiss consulate really wanted to support this. There's a Swiss consul general here in San Francisco, and they helped us apply to a Swiss program that's funded by the Swiss government called Presence Switzerland. That's one of their goals, is to really promote the country of Switzerland and some of its innovative programs. So they fully funded a delegation trip after we submitted this, and they specifically chose to fund this. You know, one of the occasions to celebrate is that San Francisco and Zurich are sister cities, and this happens to be their 20th anniversary of them being sister cities. So we got sort of lucky, very fortunate that we had a very strong partner in the Swiss government. And I just want to extend my gratitude to the Swiss government and the Swiss Consul General for partnering us on this and really giving us this extremely unique opportunity that otherwise probably wouldn't have happened had they not had a program that fully funded, you know, this group of people to go and have this learning experience. So who went on the study trip? There were 13 people from the US, 11 of those were from the Bay Area. This is a group photo of us when we were at the VBZ, which is one of the transit operators in Zurich. So they included agency staff from AC Transit, BART, Caltrain, SFM2 from SFMTA, VTA, and the Ferry Authority. And we've got 5 of the group here today. Spur and Seamless Bay Area were our nonprofit groups. We had 2 elected officials attend, including a representative from Honolulu City Council, because the Consul General also covers the Hawaii region. They wanted to include someone from that region, and they have a new rail project that's just opening up. And then we had 1 representative from the federal government or the Federal Railroad Administration who came. What did we do? We visited over 5 days. We visited, you know, federal government, regional government, the industry association, this, you know, the regional coordinating entity for Zurich, which is called ZVV, the network manager for the Zurich region. We met with local transit operator, a local operator, VBZ, you know, the city of Zurich, and then also academic startup people from the startup community that are working in transportation, a really diverse array of professionals working in different aspects of the Swiss system, and the majority of our time was spent really kind of in those types of meetings. I'll share a couple of photos here, and then we'll get to the panel questions just to give you a sense. So our trip started in Bern, which is the capital of Switzerland, because we were meeting initially with some of those federal agencies that are all based in Bern. Bern has extremely good public transit. It's a city of less than 1 million people, but it has a very robust rail bus network. We took transit everywhere we went in Switzerland, between all of these meetings. We were constantly taking transit to get, and regional transit, local transit, buses, trains, ferries, all of those modes. So we definitely got a sense of what it's like to ride transit. You see Teresa and Seamus were in that picture. This picture's got Laura and Hannah on a tram in Zurich. We paid, we experienced many times having our fares checked by different officers. We'll hear more about that. Most of our time, though, while it looks, it was a great experience, we did spend most of the time in like rooms like this, just sitting around tables and listening to presentations. Really generous, time, a lot of time spent from Swiss officials, like very generously offering their time and presenting us, being very patient with all of our questions. So again, so much gratitude to all the Swiss officials that participated in this. And it really was a very information heavy program, and we have a lot of we still are poring over some of those materials that we are sharing, and we're trying to share them as much as possible with our colleagues. And this event today is certainly part of like sharing out what we've learned. We did an exercise towards the end of the trip where we tried to compile what are the key lessons learned, and we're in the process of actually as a group trying to pull that together into a sort of more formal report. We're not done with that, so today we won't have any conclusive conclusions on exactly what we're doing with all of this information, but we wanted to have an event before, while it was still somewhat fresh in our memories around what some of the key insights were. So with that, I think that's the last slide. I'll turn it back over to Adina.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Ian, for that overview. By the way, I'm Adina Levin, Advocacy Director with Seamless Bay Area, and really looking forward to hearing from the panelists. So it's been more than 2 months, hard to believe, but since coming back from that trip, and you all met with a lot of people and visited different places, took a lot of transit, and so would really looking forward to hearing from you about what's been the impact of this trip on you. What was a key takeaway in terms of a memory, a notable experience, a transit practice that really sticks out in your mind as an important learning to take away? And fortunately, this is a photogenic trip, and people will be sharing pictures along with the story, starting with Seamus.
Thanks, Adina. Yeah, my pictures I'm sharing are pretty boring, but they're important. These are some of the slides that were shared with us by transit operators and the people who manage transit operations in the Zurich area and around Switzerland. And the biggest takeaway for me is the outcome that they've achieved on mode split for transit. And you can see these are Switzerland's major cities, and they have a tremendous amount of folks taking transit for commute purposes. This is something that I think anybody in the US would aspire to, anybody around the world would aspire to. Few have achieved it, and few have done a better job than Switzerland has. And so it prompts the question, how have they done this? And I think we spent most of our time in Switzerland trying to unwrap the answer to that question. And the next slide is one that was shared to us by Alliance Swiss Pass. And this is meant to talk about how they've developed a really integrated fare structure in Switzerland, but I think it speaks to just about everything that they've done from an integration and coordination standpoint. Just the language that's used on this slide, you can tell that they really take it to heart everywhere that they operate and everything that they do. Common systems, harmonized tariffs, common organizations. It's something that we witnessed everywhere. And it's impossible to, I think, unpack how they went about instituting these kinds of policies and producing these kinds of results without drawing some really obvious comparisons to the Bay Area and where we are as a region. because they are in a place that they were in a place that we're in now. But it was decades ago when they were experiencing declining ridership. They couldn't get the voters in Switzerland to approve transit projects. Zurich is, I think, the best example of how they really achieved an important pivot that led to the successes that we saw in Switzerland. In 1962, they proposed a light rail system that failed pretty miserably at the ballot box. They tried again 11 years later in 1973 for a subway system that they thought would be a big improvement over their underground light rail system from 62. That failed even worse. And so they went back to the drawing board and said, how are we going to get the voters to approve transit benefits and these projects that we know we desperately need, because they knew they didn't want to be a car-oriented society. And in 1981, they finally used as the basis for a ballot measure, they used regular interval timetable, clock face scheduling as the foundation for transit improvements that would have as its highlight the S-Bahn system, a regional rail network that would be developed, and the foundation of a new organization that would provide network management foundation, ZVV, as the network manager in the Zurich area that would really outline how transit would be operated. And that measure passed. And finally, they were on their way. It took obviously a long time to build out this infrastructure, but in 1990, the S-Bahn launched in Switzerland, and ridership has soared ever since then. A lot of that has to do with the way that they're organized and the way that they manage transit operations between the S-Bahn regional rail network and their more local systems. A lot of it has to do with how much they've invested in those operations and how they proceeded with the project development for the expansion of these systems. But it's all of it should be lessons learned for us in the Bay Area. We've seen the same thing, I think, that Switzerland's seen with a string of failed ballot measures. We've had some successes too, but there's a high bar in the Bay Area to move forward with voter-approved transit funding initiatives. And so we should be paying even closer attention to how Switzerland made this pivot and has done it so successfully. I know we're going to have more to say about what it means for the Bay Area and some lessons learned that we might be able to apply, but Adina, I'll turn it back to you to keep us moving.
All right, well, thank you very much. That's really thought-provoking in terms of what they do and how they got there in Switzerland. Moving on to Teresa, what do you have to share from the trip? What's your takeaway?
Yeah, thank you. It was a fantastic trip, and there were so many things to learn about. But I think the one thing that really spoke to me, perhaps because of my role as a transportation funding policy person for the region, is the very intimate connection between how the Swiss developed their public transit vision over a long period of time, and how they build their capital planning and project delivery around making that vision reality. So there's a very deep connection between those two things. They have developed a plan that is maybe 30 years out and is very detailed down to the timetable, as we would call it, and which neighborhoods are going to be served by transit and how frequently. And they've kind of detailed that all out for 30 years in advance. And the capital project process through different levels of government, from the transit operator to the, I guess it's called the agglomeration or the regional kind of network manager, to the federal level, are all kind of working together to put together a program of projects that will help to deliver that transit vision. And I think that's fantastic. It's very focused. It's really goal-oriented. And this slide kind of speaks to that. It is the comparison between, train services over, a decade and a half. And you can see how it started to kind of fill out. And, there's more service in certain areas. And so, I just can imagine that this map eventually will represent in 2030 or whatever the time frame is, exactly what the transit vision was drawn out to be. So I think that was probably my number one takeaway. We obviously do things differently here in the Bay Area. We do have a long range plan, and we do set goals and we do measure projects. We put larger projects through some sort of a performance process, but we don't really select transit projects based on a long-term regional transit vision, because at this moment we don't have one. But I think that is an opportunity that I hope we can make good on in the near future, because I do think it's really helpful to have something like that it is a guide for everyone in terms of what projects should float to the top.
All right, thanks very much. And that's inspiring for us to have a vision, and a vision that's based on moving people from place to place around the country. So next, Hannah, what do you have to share from the trip?
Thanks, Adina. So it was a really inspiring visit. And I think we did learn a lot, and there's a lot of different components to what makes the Swiss system so successful. But I think for me, the biggest takeaway was just how comprehensive the system was. So the transit network serves all areas of the country, from urban centers to small cities, recreational destinations, and rural areas. Overall, they have 3,200 miles of rail, plus buses, ferries, trams, and gondola services. Ian already described some of the robust urban area services. Another example is, Lausanne, which is slightly smaller than Santa Rosa. I believe it is the smallest city in the world to have a full metro system. So the level of urban infrastructure for transit service is pretty impressive. And, Teresa just showed the map for Zurich. It's really lends itself to a very high level of service. In addition to that, they have services that go out to the more rural and suburban areas, as well as to recreation areas. There are even mountain resorts that do not even allow cars at all. They're only accessible by transit. And that's really, leisure was actually the largest mobility purpose as of 2021. So the importance of that access to those recreational and other types of trip purpose is really emphasized. I think we focus a lot on the commute, or we have historically, perhaps. Maybe we're moving away from that now in the Bay Area, but that purpose, that sense that all trips could be made on transit anywhere you need to go. So it's a great network. But the importance of that takeaway is really how that comprehensive system results in a virtuous cycle where people know they can rely on transit to take them where they need to go, and a reliable, in terms of the location where they need to go, but also the frequency, and with a high quality experience. And so that really supports their willingness to continue to invest in transit. And that's that virtuous cycle, I think, that really keeps Switzerland, enables them to keep improving their network and growing it to support their population growth and really having a robust network. So to me, that was my takeaway.
All right, inspiring story and inspiring picture.
Yeah, sorry, I was really torn between like an urban, really dense picture and but I couldn't really keep myself from showing the beautiful mountains. So this is a recreational example, obviously.
Cool. That's great. Ian, and what did you take away from the trip?
So many things, but I want to sort of complement what I think others have said. One thing that really came through so clearly to me was the commitment to the customer, and the customer focus as being like how every single kind of issue is sort of ultimately framed, and the diversity of people that we spoke to at all of these different levels of government really talked about the customer in the same way, and just kept coming back to doing things in such a way that was oriented around customers and creating a convenient system. And I picked as my image sort of these 3 real-time screens that I encountered on 3 different transit agencies in different parts of the country. I think the top one is a Bern tram. The second one is in Zurich, and the third one is an interregional train between, I guess, Lucerne and Zurich. And they're a little bit different, but there's clearly a standard here in terms of the way information is displayed to the customer. In fact, there are wayfinding standards, there's still the ability, there's obviously multiple brands, they're slightly different, but the way, it's obviously, there's a common way of displaying the destination, the line, the agency is not reinventing the wheel. There's a familiarity for the customer. And that was just, whether it's doing signs in the same way, or whether it's doing your fare-based system, your fare system in the same way, or coordinating your schedules. The people that we spoke to certainly said it can sometimes be difficult. It's not always easy, but there was, at the end of the day, this agreement that yes, it's the right thing to do for the customer, and everyone was very much committed to that process. So that's just going to stick with me, because that was really refreshing and I think very powerful to hear people really just constantly emphasizing the importance of collaboration, yet acknowledging that it can be sometimes difficult, but it does require to stay at the table and just constantly be elevating the needs of customers above everything else.
Great. That also sounds inspiring for us. Laura, what do you have to share from the trip? I guess we're in an urban area. Laura,
Thanks. Thanks. Yes, I am bringing us back to the city from the mountains. So I first off want to say thank you to Seamless Bay Area and to President Switzerland for sending us on this tour. It was such a unique learning opportunity and a real gift to all of us. So again, just appreciate that opportunity. And it's really hard to pick just one thing to focus in on. But what I am going to talk a little bit about is urban transit, and kind of the Swiss model really does not make transit an alternative or even an equal to the car. It's actually the superior choice in the cities. And the way that one of the things that I think is so important, one of the ways that they do that I think is important to point out is really by giving the trams and buses their own separate lanes on city streets. So they have the right of way. They really kind of own that street in terms of the spatial arrangements. And they have the priority at signals. So they get to go first. And because they're on the street, people literally walk off the tram and straight into a store quite seamlessly. And I don't think it's unrelated that the whole time we were there, I don't think we saw a single vacant storefront. It's just really accessible and easy to get around and to get what you need in the city, because you just walk on and off. And you can see here kind of the density, I think, of the trams and kind of the transit service that is possible with that level of transit priority on the streets. I think one of the things that comes with this that are because of transit priority on the streets, one is it wasn't enough to kind of make the quality of the transit service excellent. It's also about making it harder to drive and in the city. And so that means that, they have been removing surface parking and putting it underground, or removing some parking spaces altogether. And the root of that is not about cars versus transit. It was fundamentally about a conviction that streets are public spaces, and that in a small country with a lot of people and serious geographic and kind of natural constraints on their growth, they really had to make sure that every ounce of, or every foot meter of public space in the city was really efficiently used, and that it really belongs to the people. And so I think that was really at the root of so many of the decisions about how they use their streets. I think a secondary element related to that is that it becomes a lot faster and a lot more cost effective to add new transit, to add new capacity in a city, because it's on the street. They're not going to have to dig a tunnel to put a new tram tram in. And so that tends to lead to faster and more cost-effective project delivery, and allows you to achieve that kind of dense service network that that Teresa showed in her image. And so again, this piece of really giving the right of way to transit and is just so important in making transit not just, you know, the most affordable option, but really just the more practical option for every type of trip in the city.
Thanks. And so I want to move on to the next one. People have been asking really good questions in the Q&A. So please keep going. Don't stop, and we'll get to the questions at the end, as many as we can. So having had this experience and looking at what is done in Switzerland and how they do it, what are the upcoming opportunities that you see for the Bay Area, and or in the work that you do to apply some of the lessons that you do in that apply the lessons learned in Switzerland, and starting with Teresa Rommel from MTC.
Yeah, thank you. First off, I'd like to just caveat that, you know, my responses are more of a personal reflection. And I believe that there's a joint report in the works that is being developed from all of the participants who went. So that should be forthcoming soon. But I think personally, I think one opportunity that exists, and kind of hearkening back to my answer in question one about the relationship between having the vision and then kind of gearing your project selection and project development process to accomplish that vision. You know, we are MTC staff in close collaboration with transit operator staff have kind of launched this Transit 2050 plus effort, which I think at its goal is kind of a regional vision for public transit. I think the plan for that process is to develop an integrated and well-connected transit network that is reliable in, you know, improved speeds and, you know, remove some of the barriers for using public transit. And that's all nested within our long-range planning process for Plan Bay Area 2050. So to me, that represents an opportunity to do some of that visioning work that the Swiss has become very good at doing, and perhaps have some sort of a regional overlay that in the future, you know, the capital programs that we look at funding through our various regional discretionary sources would be more geared towards that vision in the Bay Area for public transit. So I do see that as an opportunity. It may be an iterative process. It may not, you know, be the be all and end all vision forever, but I think it is definitely a step in the right direction.
All right, thanks. And looking forward to us in the Bay Area learning for our planning process. So next up is Hannah. And what takeaways do you have that you see potentially learning for the Bay Area and in your work?
Thanks. So to me, that question of the virtuous cycle and how we move into being a network that riders can rely on in order to get everywhere that they need to go, and therefore be willing to, you know, support investment in transit, seems sometimes like a big lift. But I think, you know, particularly in our current financial crisis, you know, really highlights the need to get into that cycle. So one thing we've been trying to advance is coordinated service planning between agencies and aligning our schedules and schedule changes. The more we can function as a single comprehensive network, the easier it will be to use. We're also going to, I think we should continue pursuing efforts to get closer to that transit priority state that Laura was describing, really getting buses out of traffic so they improve their reliability and speed, and improve our transit supportive policies. So we shouldn't be competing with car for public spaces. That public space flowing on and on of the transit network, I think, was really key to how well the Swiss system is used. So hopefully continuing to push all those efforts forward while we develop the vision and the Transit 2050 plus to really continue to move our system forward. So some big lifts there, but I think we can move those things forward.
All right. Great, thanks. And as for Seamus, what do you see as lessons that we can take for the Bay Area and you might be able to take in what you do?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me not to look at all of this through the lens of how do we pass a regional ballot measure, because I think that's the most important thing that we have facing us as far as challenges are concerned, and we need it. I mean, transit is in crisis. There are some minimum things that we need out of that ballot measure, and some of those might not have much to do with the high standard that Switzerland has shown us when it comes to operating and building transit. But the question is, what of those things can we learn that we can include in a ballot measure to make it politically viable? Because I don't think if we just ask the voters to bail us out and provide us with whatever increased subsidy we need to continue to make our systems functional, we're going to be successful. I just don't think it will happen. We've seen a recent poll from MTC that shows how daunting it's going to be to try and pass this measure. And look, we've been spoiled for a long time in the Bay Area with high fare box recovery regional systems, much higher fare box recovery than other regions around the country, and that was great. But it also shows how vulnerable we are to something like a pandemic or anything else that's going to reduce ridership. It's time for us to subsidize our systems in a greater way. They do that in Switzerland, we know that. But they also made promises and developed minimum standards and guaranteed that those standards would be met when they asked voters to approve these funding measures. And we have a lot to learn from the standards that they applied, from the guarantees that they made. The clock-based scheduling is and the time transfers are a perfect one. They had very simple ways of communicating the fare integration that they applied with one journey, one ticket tagline, and those are all things that we should be looking at and studying as we develop our measure. And the timing couldn't be better. We have, thanks to the work that Seamless Bay Area has done and MTC has done, and everybody who participated in the Blue Ribbon Task Force, we have a transformation action plan. We have regional network management committees that are starting the really important work to decide and develop what those standards should be. And we have to make sure that they're applied over the course of the effort to develop an expenditure plan if we want to do this right. So that's my biggest takeaway, and I know there's a lot more discussion to be had on that. I'm excited to be a part of it.
Thanks. And Laura, what do you see as lessons for what's coming forward from the Bay Area and what your role might be in that?
Sure. I mean, I think there are a lot of lessons, and I think there are a lot of opportunities to advance some of the things we'd like to see. Since folks here are mostly talking about the regional level, I'm going to talk a little bit about the state level. With the budget package that the state legislature and governor passed this year, they also established a transit transformation task force, not so different from what was set up here in the region at the start of the pandemic. And the idea is really to kind of look at what needs to be the role of the state in funding and kind of changing the operating environment from a policy and regulatory level for transit. And I think that's a really big opportunity, I think, to kind of shape some of the really essential factors for transit's success. And so I think that's a really important place to be thinking about our efforts. Similarly, I think that's a really important role for the state. The state owns a lot of our roads. And so thinking about what can they play in kind of giving transit priority on the streets is really key.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. And Ian, what do you see as lessons for the Bay Area and for what Seamless does?
Yeah, I agree. I think I don't have too much to add. I agree with. I was going to mention the regional measure. I think what Seamus said is totally I agree with that. That's the really big opportunity for us, and it means we need to get to work right away on planning for a 2026 measure and figuring out what reforms go along with that. that can allow us to be in a position where we're offering that very compelling promise to voters, that vision based on service, combined with the one ticket, one journey tagline. That's the big opportunity for us. And we now know how to do it. Like this trip, I mean, we've been trying to learn how to do it for a long time, but this trip, I think really for those of us who were there, really, I think showed that it's possible. And so I think we're certainly as Seamless Bay Area, we're trying to spread that knowledge as widely as possible through events like this. I agree with Laura also that the state task force is it's going to be a complementary other opportunity to elevate this at the state level. I'd love to see a state delegation go to Switzerland, as a next step. And for some of our state legislators and even folks from Southern California and working on the state rail plan, be working on that. The very last thing I'll just say is like, it's important. Something we learned about that was somewhat shocking to me was like, there's a lot going on in the Bay Area right now. We have a big problem with the opioid crisis, homelessness. There's a lot of things that feel also extremely pressing, and it feels like sometimes like those are creating a lot of challenges for transit right now. Interestingly, in the 90s, Zurich was facing one of the worst heroin epidemics in Europe as well. It was there's information on it online, but it was a huge problem. Some of the photos that they have of encampments in central Zurich, look very familiar to us, and is really, to me, that was somewhat reassuring that they were working on that. They were able to work on multiple problems at once. They were working on making the case to build and invest in better transit, and they were also simultaneously working on that issue. To me, that's a lesson. It's like we can't deal with this problem until we've dealt with that other problem. We really need to be working on multiple problems all at once, and so we need to be bringing. I know it's hard for transit agencies sometimes to focus on a lot of things and think long term and think short term at the same time. But this is an example where I think from Switzerland learning that we really do need to be working on this longer term project of how do we transform transit over a decade, as well as dealing with some of these things that are right in front of us. And it's only if we really work on both of those things that we're going to turn this ship around.
Great, thanks. And I want to go to some of the very good questions from the chat Q&A, and there are a few related questions having to do with the people aspect of this transformation. And one of the questions has to do with the changes in the culture and practices of the people who make the system work. So for anybody on the panel, what do you see and think about the openness of people that work in the system and make the system run in terms of openness to learning and change? And feel free to raise your hand if you have some thoughts on the question. And so staff, people who run agencies, people who work at agencies. Yeah. Hannah.
I guess I would say that, I think there's a lot of interest in looking at international best practice and trying to improve transit, including across between agencies as well as, internally at BART. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of excitement and interest in exploring these topics and trying to take on best practice. So I think that there's a lot of openness there. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question all the way, but that would be my perspective.
All right. Yeah, I think that does address the question. Any other thoughts on that? And then more questions, Seamus.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we saw is that the operators and the people who are responsible for developing the standards that they operate under, they're all proud of the work that they've done. They're incredibly proud of the systems. They brought us and paid for a trip for a bunch of Bay Area transit folks to come and witness it for themselves because of how proud they are of it, and they want to show it off. And there was, we asked the operators, look, do you feel like you're just contracted by this, regional planning entity to deliver the service, and you don't have much say in how it's delivered, and you're just there to run whatever schedule they tell you to run? And that's not how they view it at all. They view it as a really collaborative process. It's something that they obviously, as we've already discussed, in a long time planning and thinking it out. And it's not dictated, by it's not an authority that's just dictated to them by a higher level, and they have to follow those rules. They're rules that they develop together in a really thoughtful way. So and that makes them all able to be proud of the outcomes that they've achieved.
Mhm. Okay, great. I think that's a good, satisfying answer. And moving on to a related question about the political will. Did you learn anything about the development in Switzerland of the political will to make these changes, and thoughts about, are we going to be able to develop a political will in our area? And feel free to think about this and raise your hand if you have something to say on that topic. Hannah.
I mean, I think that's a great question. I think one thing I found uniformly was that all of the different agencies spoke to the same policy direction and had a real pride in sort of the consensus building coordination that they do. So I think that was very inspiring, that there was a real clear direction and where everybody was trying to go for the environment and for improving the quality of life in Switzerland. So I think I don't know how easy that is to get to in the Bay Area, but I hope so. I hope we can.
Mm-hmm. Any more thoughts on building up the political will, what they did and what we might do? Ian, are you trying to talk?
Oh, no, Laura has her hand.
Laura, okay.
I was going to offer that, Ian, you mentioned that the motto is sort of one ticket, or one journey, one ticket. And it's not really a motto as much as it is a mandate. And I think it's a mandate that creates a lot of political will. I think in California, we have established some really ambitious contemporary goals for transit but our actual funding programs and policies are still really rooted on some 1970s goals and expectations. And so there's quite a lot of confusion and not a lot of clarity of purpose. And I think what the mandate of one journey, one ticket does is it's sort of like a domino effect. There's that clarity of purpose and everything falls behind. And I think that creates a lot of support. I think the political will has a lot to do with the relevance of transit in people's lives. So because it is everywhere and because it is so practical, you don't question what is the role of transit or its value proposition. You know it. And so unfortunately, we don't have that in the Bay Area. And so the political constituency in support of transit is much smaller here than it is there. And so I think that's a real challenge for us.
Thanks. So I wanted to segue to some questions that were about the streets and whether there was anything that you learned about how the Swiss integrate active transportation, biking and walking, and how they make the decisions about allocating street space. Anything that you learned about those topics? Ian.
So I'm just going from memory here. It wasn't a big focus of the tour, but we did learn about how Zurich, one of the interesting things that I remember is that there was a policy of capping the total number of parking spaces in central Zurich that sort of coincided with all the other kind of some of the changes that were happening. And I think even a desire to reduce the number of spaces over time. So that was an important policy that was put in place during probably sometime in the 80s, that has over time led to, it's driven a lot of the kind of removal of, as parking lots became unaffordable, like if they would build a garage, but they wouldn't be able to net increase the number of spaces. And I think now they're looking at reducing it. The sort of general philosophy is move some of the parking to the outer outer edges of the, the central city and the network, so that people like leave their cars behind once they're in an area that's very walkable and highly transit accessible. And there seemed to be a really strong citywide, at least, framework for doing that. And I think that was reinforced even at the national policy level, thinking of, they kind of talk about multimodal planning as transferring from a vehicle onto transit, which I don't think we think of multimodal planning as necessarily that type of multimodal, but it is for a lot of communities. It's like that actually is, it's an important concept of, it's not just multimodal all between active modes, but it's like recognizing there's certain areas you probably have to drive, like how can we make it as convenient as possible to get, to at the points where we have space for parking and we're not taking up valuable real estate, but maybe on the periphery of the system, transferring onto that seamlessly integrated network, so that then once you're in the inner city, you can transfer easily between all the different modes to get where you need to go.
Okay, thanks. Last question, and then we'll get to the wrap up about what's happening next. So would a regional ballot measure have a better chance of passing if accompanied by a serious integration plan, meaning the consolidation of agencies, elimination of redundant infrastructure, and any other aspects of integration that you would think would belong in associated with a funding measure?
I mean, I can start. I kind of said it before, but I don't think it can pass unless it includes some of those elements, and we need to get the right mix of those elements to make sure that they're included. I'm not sure consolidation is a part of it. What we learned in Switzerland is that they have more transit agencies than we do in the Bay Area, far more. I think there was over 200. They're just functioning in a different way, and they're working together to complete a planning process and an operating process that is just far different from what we do here. So it's what can we learn from that and apply it into a ballot measure and make some of those same guarantees, so that we can make that same pivot that they were able to make.
All right, great, thanks. And Teresa and Ian, and then we will wrap up with what's next.
I was just going to kind of repeat a little bit of what Seamus said, in that, I've seen a lot of the comments about consolidation, and I think that we've learned over the years that even consolidation is not the magic pill that a lot of people think it is. And, as we saw in the Swiss study, there are a lot of agencies that are working quite well, not being consolidated. So I just wanted to put that out there, that, I think we've looked at consolidation over the years, and it's not necessarily a cost saver. There may be some efficiencies, but sometimes there's also downsides to that as well. But I do agree that in order for a regional measure to be successful, we'll need to be able to make a case to the voters that we are making improvements to the system that we all want you to use and pay for. So I would just put in a plug that yes, absolutely, some sort of transit transformation or improvement of the customer experience is going to have to be part and parcel with any new revenue measure.
Okay, Ian, last answer on this, and then moving on to what's next and how we can learn more and participate more. Yeah,
well, polling, there's been polling, and that shows that integration and creating an integrated fare service, coordinated schedules, polls extremely highly among voters. So it does really seem like like being able to deliver on that and having a thought through plan for how to deliver on that will increase our likelihood of success. I think while we didn't learn specifically about consolidation in Switzerland, like one thing that is to me of note, though, is they do have a lead regional, they have a very clear lead rail authority called SBB that is nationwide, there's a sort of undisputed lead rail agency for regional trips. And we didn't learn so much about the origin story about them. I think it dates back quite a ways, but it is an important part of the picture. And I would argue that is something that is still, even with improved coordination, it's like we have some rail specific issues because there's rail infrastructure, and the needs around rail are so specific that I think it's worth kind of considering that as we approach a regional measure. but I do think, you know, similarly, I think voters more generally, I think, are looking for evidence that we're being efficient, we're being smart about resources, and we're not doing things in a duplicative way. And so that can be, we can achieve those better outcomes and the efficiencies through doing things differently, not necessarily consolidation, but by centralizing certain functions that don't need to be done on an agency by agency basis, but can be done out of one center of excellence that might exist at MTC, or it might exist at BART, or it might exist at another agency. We heard about different models whereby the security is done by one agency on behalf of all of them in Zurich, or the customer call center is run by one agency on behalf of all the agencies in Zurich. And ZVV kind of was helpful in contracting out and leveraging those individual expertise of the operators to create those centers of excellence, and was coordinating it all. And it occurred without consolidation. But we do need to show, I think, those efficiencies. What we're trying to get at, I think, when we talk about consolidation, is really the efficiency picture. And I think we need to think through how we are going to kind of make that case around efficiency in order to win the confidence of voters.
All right. So what's next? There's going to be more learning from Switzerland at AC Transit's board workshop on their network planning on August 30th. So this is a public meeting. Anyone can come and learn more, including with AC Transit, thinking about what they want to learn. There's a webinar coming up, thinking particularly about transformation for Caltrain in the Bay Area. Learning some of these lessons to transcend beyond a commuter rail model. That's August 23rd at 1. There's going to be an in-person event regarding California learning from Sweden, and that is coming up on September 11th at 5:30. We've got a couple of other events that are coming up in October and November. We'll let you know when they are scheduled. And importantly, MTC is starting an outreach process, getting feedback for a regional measure and a connected network plan. And in the follow-up materials from this, we will get you information about participating in that as well. It's going to be an action-packed few years here, with opportunities for people, those of us as members of the public, and people that are working within the system, to learn from these lessons and transform our system. So thank you so much for the panelists for coming and sharing your thoughts and your learning. And we are really looking forward to what can be done to integrate, no pun intended, from what we learned in Switzerland. Thanks all.
Thank you.